The main beneficiaries of Arévalo's win are people who have never had a say in how democracy is run in Guatemala.
Nuestros objetivos son el desarrollo, el combate a la corrupción, el combate a la pobreza, la lucha por servicios públicos que lleguen a toda la población, la lucha por lograr sacar a el enorme número de guatemaltecos y guatemaltecas que hoy están fuera de la economía para incorporarlos a la economía, para incorporarlos al desarrollo. Por un lado, es la lucha por mantener las instituciones democráticas.
The fascinating thing about Movimiento Semilla is its origins. In 2015, an international investigation led by the Commission Against Corruption and Impunity in Guatemala, which was a UN-backed judicial body tasked with investigating high-profile corruption cases, uncovered this massive scandal that involved then President and Vice President Otto Pérez Molina and Roxana Valdetti. This took place in 2015, and when Guatemalans found out that the highest echelons of the state were, running a scheme in the country's customs to enrich themselves, they took to the streets. And these massive mobilizations of 2015 included the participation of many student activists, young professionals, public intellectuals that would later become the party cadres of Movimiento Semilla. And this is almost like an amorphous amalgam of different sectors of society: former intelligence, military members, people in the organized private sector, political elites who have clung to power through clientelistic practices, all of whom collude to latch onto power by doing shady deals and business enterprises together. And that means that they exclude a large majority of the population from this participatory democracy that was promised after the new constitution was signed in Guatemala in 1985. A quick footnote to that: Guatemala endured a civil war for 36 years after the coup d'etat that led Bernardo Arévalo's father to flee and to go into exile. This culminated in over 200,000 deaths, and many of us believe that there was a genocidal campaign against indigenous Maya peoples in the 70s and 80s. So the social fabric has been torn, and that has not been remediated even after the peace accords of 1996. But when you see a centrist reformer from outside of Guatemala's power structure winning resoundingly in last Sunday's presidential elections, it is a victory for democracy around the world. So what I say to the question, why is this important, is because the 2023 Guatemalan election is actually breaking paradigms. Winning an election without being financed by corruption, or drug trafficking, or organized crime, or the robust private sector that exists in Guatemala is actually possible. And political parties can be diverse, organic, and digital, and not merely vehicles for electoral contention. This has not been a free and fair electoral process in Guatemala. The courts have intervened multiple times, and now we see the Attorney General's office, or the Ministerio Público, try to intervene in the results. So it's trying to undermine popular sentiments and the popular vote by alleging that Movimiento Semilla, the party that won by a landslide on the second round, was illegally constituted. So this process is currently ongoing, even though, as I said, people took to the streets on Sunday in jubilant celebrations. The threat of Semilla losing party status looms very closely. And given that they have a small representation in next year's legislature, they only have 23 seats out of 160, losing party status would mean that those 23 legislators would no longer have a party. They would become an independent voting bloc. And that has several consequences, among which they cannot be on the leadership of Congress, they cannot sit on commissions, they cannot become representatives of the state of Guatemala at an international level. And essentially, what would happen is that Bernardo Arévalo would not have a voice in the legislature. One in two children in Guatemala has child malnutrition. Over 60% of the population lives under the poverty line, and 20% of the country's GDP derives from remittances sent from abroad. So this weakened rule of law and widespread corruption exacerbate these factors, particularly poverty. And when you add climate change into this equation, we see that the increasing numbers of migrants leaving Guatemala in search of safety and better opportunities will only increase if the root causes are not tackled. Indigenous rights are not being respected. One of the main issues that I study as a political sociologist and social movement scholar is the impacts that extractivism have had on communities in rural parts of the countries. Guatemala, unfortunately, boasts a sad record, which is a high number of environmental defenders being murdered for protecting their territory. So this is an issue that needs to become an important part of Bernardo Arévalo's governance strategy. How are we going to provide protection to those who are protecting the environment?